never meant to hear those tapes. Hell, I wasn't even supposed to be in Building 30 at Johnson Space Center that night in October 2019, but the security guard had called in sick and they needed someone to cover the overnight shift. Simple job: walk the halls, check the locks, make sure nobody was stealing decades-old computer equipment that barely qualified as museum pieces. The Houston facility always felt different after midnight. During the day, it buzzed with engineers and administrators, but at night, the place became a mausoleum of American space exploration. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead in empty corridors lined with photos of smiling astronauts who'd either retired or died years ago. I was making my third sweep through the archive wing when I noticed the door to storage room 47C standing open. That was wrong. Every door in that section should have been locked tight, secured behind key cards that required clearance levels way above my pay grade. But there it was, cracked open just enough to let a sliver of yellow light spill into the hallway. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I pushed the door wider. Rows of metal shelving stretched back into shadows, packed with boxes labeled with mission designations and dates going back to the Mercury program. But what caught my attention was the desk in the corner where someone had left a reel-to-reel tape player running. The machine was ancient, probably from the 70s, its mechanical gears turning slowly as magnetic tape wound between the spools. A pair of headphones lay on the desk beside a folder marked Apollo 13 Classified Audio Logs, Eyes Only. The classification stamps were faded but still legible, TOPSECRET, in red letters across the manila cover. I should have called it in immediately, should have backed out of that room and reported the security breach to my supervisor. Instead, I found myself walking toward that desk, drawn by the soft whisper of the tape mechanism and the sight of handwritten notes scattered beside the folder. The headphones were warm when I picked them up, as if someone had been wearing them just moments before. I glanced around the room one more time, confirming I was alone, then placed them over my ears. Static filled my head first, then the familiar crackle of space-to-ground communications. But underneath that white noise, I heard something else, a sound that made my skin crawl even before I understood what I was listening to. It was breathing. Not the controlled respiration of astronauts in pressurized suits, but something deeper, more deliberate. The kind of breathing you might hear if you pressed your ear to a sleeping person's chest. Except this was coming from the vacuum of space, recorded 50 years ago during humanity's most famous near disaster. I was about to remove the headphones when a voice emerged from the static, clear, human, and speaking words that would change everything I thought I knew about Apollo 13. The voice belonged to Jim Lovell. "Houston, we're getting some unusual readings on the external cameras. There's Christ, Jack. Are you seeing this?" Another voice, Jack Swigert. "Roger that, Jim." "Houston, we have visual contact with what appears to be multiple light sources maintaining formation approximately 200 meters off our starboard side." I knew this wasn't part of the official Apollo 13 transcripts. I'd read every public document about that mission during my aerospace engineering studies at Rice University before I washed out and ended up pushing papers for NASA contractors. The explosion that crippled the service module happened on April 13th, 1970, but this conversation was dated 3 days earlier, when everything was still supposed to be routine. The tape hissed as Mission Control responded, "Apollo 13, Houston. Can you describe these light sources? Are they debris from your vehicle?" "Negative, Houston." Fred Hayes' voice now, tight with something that sounded like suppressed panic. "These aren't debris. They're moving independently, changing formation. Jim, that one on the left just..." Static erupted across the channel, drowning out Hayes' words. I adjusted the volume, leaning closer to catch every whisper beneath the electronic snow. When the signal cleared, Lovell was speaking again, but his voice had changed. Lower now, almost conversational. "Houston, disregard our last transmission. We're experiencing some equipment malfunctions. All readings normal." "Copy that, Apollo 13, everything looks good from here." The exchange felt wrong. Lovell's sudden shift from concern to dismissal was too abrupt, too clean. Professional astronauts didn't just ignore visual contacts in deep space. I flipped through the handwritten notes beside the tape player. The pages were filled with timestamps, frequency analyses, and what looked like translation attempts of some kind of code. At the bottom of one page, someone had written in red ink, "They were already being watched. The explosion was a response." My hands started shaking as I turned the page. More notes, these in different handwriting. Pattern analysis of light formations suggests intelligence. Movement too coordinated for natural phenomena or human technology. Recommend immediate classification upgrade. Below that, a third set of handwriting, this one in hasty scrawl. All 3 astronauts reported direct communication attempts beginning April 11th. Voices sounded like family members. Content classified beyond top secret. Do not release under any circumstances. The tape continued playing. Hours of routine transmissions, systems checks, course corrections. Then, buried deep in a conversation about water rationing, I heard it again, that breathing sound, but now it was coming from inside the spacecraft. "Jim?" Swigert's voice, uncertain. "Did you guys hear that?" "Hear what, Jack?" "Sounded like, never mind, must be the CO2 scrubbers acting up." But I could hear it clearly through the headphones. Slow, deliberate inhalation and exhalation that definitely wasn't coming from any life support system. It had rhythm, almost musical, like something was savoring each breath. I fast-forwarded the tape, searching for more anomalies. Most of the transmissions matched the public record, but scattered throughout were these fragments, conversations that had been edited out, references to things that officially never happened. At timestamp 47:23:18, just hours before the famous explosion, Lovell's voice emerged from the static with words that made my blood run cold. "Houston, we need to discuss the passengers." "Say again, Apollo 13. "The passengers, Houston, the ones that have been following us since translunar injection. They're getting closer." Mission Control's response was immediate and sharp. "Apollo 13, switch to encrypted channel immediately. All further communications on this topic are classified." The tape went silent for nearly 10 minutes. When it resumed, the astronauts were discussing routine trajectory adjustments as if nothing had happened. I sat back in the chair, processing what I'd just heard. According to every history book, documentary, and NASA publication, Apollo 13 had been a clean mission until the oxygen tank explosion. 3 men alone in space fighting to survive and return home. But these tapes suggested something else entirely. Something had been tracking the spacecraft from the beginning, and NASA had known about it. My phone buzzed with a text message, "Unknown number, you shouldn't be listening to that." I spun around, scanning the storage room. Empty shelves stretched into darkness. No movement, no sound except the soft mechanical whisper of the tape machine. Another text. "Building 30, storage room 47C, we know where you are." I ripped the headphones off and grabbed the folder of notes. Whatever was on these tapes, someone didn't want it getting out. But as I headed for the door, I realized the most terrifying thing wasn't that I'd discovered classified information. It was that someone had left that room unlocked specifically for me to find it. I didn't make it to the parking lot. The elevator stopped between floors 3 and 2 with a soft mechanical sigh, trapping me in fluorescent-lit limbo with that folder clutched against my chest. The emergency button did nothing. My cell phone showed no signal. Above me, the ceiling speaker crackled to life. "Tommy Brennan." The voice was calm, elderly, with a slight southern drawl. "Son, you need to come back upstairs. We have things to discuss." I'd never told anyone at NASA my first name. My badge and paperwork all listed me as T. Brennan. Only my mother back in Galveston called me Tommy, and she'd been dead for 3 years. "Who is this?" I called out to the empty elevator car. "Floor 7, room 734, the door will be unlocked." The elevator lurched back to life, carrying me upward past floors I hadn't even known existed in Building 30. When the doors opened on 7, I found myself facing a corridor that looked nothing like the rest of the facility. The walls were darker, older, lined with photos of spacecraft and astronauts I didn't recognize. Room 734 sat at the end of the hall, its door marked with a simple placard, "Dr. Harrison Webb, Special Projects Division." Inside, an old man sat behind a massive wooden desk that seemed impossibly out of place in the sterile NASA environment. He had to be pushing 80, with silver hair and deep-set eyes that studied me with uncomfortable intensity. The walls around him were covered with star charts, technical diagrams, and what looked like surveillance photographs of various spacecraft. "Sit down, Tommy." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I've been waiting 49 years to have this conversation." I remained standing, the folder still pressed against my chest. "Dr. Webb, I assume. I was just doing my security rounds when you stumbled into storage room 47C and found the Apollo 13 archives." He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "Except it wasn't stumbling, was it? You were led there, just like your father was led there in 1971. The words hit me like a physical blow. My father died in Vietnam in 1970. He never worked for NASA. Dr. Webb opened a desk drawer and withdrew a black and white photograph. He slid it across the desk toward me. The image showed a younger version of himself standing next to a man in a NASA technician's uniform. The technician's face was unmistakable. The same square jaw and dark eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. "Thomas Brennan Sr., Webb said softly. "Radio technician, Classified Communications Division. He was part of the team that first heard the transmissions from Apollo 13 about the passengers. He also tried to go public with the information." I picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. My father looked younger than I'd ever seen him in family pictures, maybe 25 years old. The NASA patch on his uniform was crisp and new. "That's impossible. He was drafted, infantry, killed at Firebase Charlie in the Mekong Delta." Webb shook his head. "That was his cover story, Tommy. Your father never left Houston. He spent 2 years working on the Apollo communications array, specifically monitoring deep space transmissions for unusual activity. When he threatened to leak the Apollo 13 recordings to the press, we had to make him disappear. The military records were falsified to explain his absence." The room seemed to spin around me, everything I'd believed about my family, my father's sacrifice, my mother's grief, all of it built on lies. "Show me," I whispered. Webb stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. He returned with a thick manila folder labeled Brennan Thomas Sr., Operational Status, Terminated. Inside were documents I'd never seen, medical records showing my father alive and working at Johnson Space Center through 1972. Psychiatric evaluations describing his increasing paranoia regarding extraterrestrial surveillance. And finally, a single sheet of paper dated December 15th, 1972. Subject eliminated. Cover story implemented successfully. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice sounded hollow in the small room. "Because the passengers are back." Webb walked to the window overlooking the darkened facility. "We've been tracking unusual signals for the past 6 months. Deep space communications on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The same patterns we recorded during Apollo 13, but stronger now. Much stronger." He turned back to face me, his expression grave. "Whatever those things were that followed Lovell and his crew, they've been watching us ever since. Learning our technology, studying our behavior, and now they're ready to make contact again." I thought about the breathing sounds on the tape, the voices that had sounded like family members. What did they want with the Apollo 13 crew? To test us. Webb returned to his desk and pulled out another file. "The explosion wasn't an accident, Tommy. It was deliberate. Something wanted to see how humans would react under extreme stress, how we'd behave when faced with death in the vacuum of space. Apollo 13 was an experiment, and we were the lab rats." The file he opened contained photographs that made my stomach turn. Images of the Apollo 13 command module after splashdown, showing burn marks on the hull that didn't match the official damage reports. Close-up shots of strange symbols etched into the heat shield, symbols that looked almost like writing. "The astronauts came back changed," Webb continued. "Subtle differences that only their families noticed at first. Lovell started speaking in his sleep, using words that weren't in any human language. Swigert developed an obsession with deep space radio signals. And Hayes started drawing star maps of constellations that don't exist. He slid another photograph across the desk. This one showed Fred Hayes sitting in what looked like a psychiatric facility, surrounded by papers covered in intricate geometric patterns and alien mathematics. All 3 men died within 10 years of their return, Webb said. Official causes were heart attack, cancer, and suicide. But the truth is, whatever communicated with them during that mission left something behind. Something that slowly consumed them from the inside. I stared at the photographs, trying to process the implications. And now you think these passengers are coming back? I don't think, Tommy. I know. Webb walked to a bank of monitors along the far wall and switched them on. The screens showed various telescope feeds, satellite imagery, and radio spectrum analyses. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations picked up the first transmission in 50 years. The largest monitor displayed a waveform analysis that looked almost organic in its complexity. Below it, a computer-generated translation appeared in green text. Preparation complete. Collection commencing. Subjects ready for integration. Webb turned to face me, his eyes reflecting the green glow of the monitors. Your father tried to warn the world about this. He died trying to prevent what's coming. The question is, Tommy, are you going to finish what he started, or are you going to let humanity become part of their collection? Outside the window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. But as I watched, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Among the stars that were fading with the approaching sunrise, 3 points of light remained visible, burning steady and bright. And they were moving closer. The lights went out across Building 30 exactly at 6:17 a.m. Not just the electric lights, everything. Emergency backup systems, computer displays, even the digital clocks on Webb's desk went dark simultaneously. The only illumination came from those 3 points of light outside the window, which had grown noticeably brighter in the past few minutes. They're here, Webb whispered, his face pale in the alien glow. The silence that followed was absolute. No air conditioning hum, no electrical buzz, no distant traffic from the highway outside Johnson Space Center. It was as if the entire facility had been wrapped in cotton, isolated from the rest of the world. Then the radios started talking. Old vacuum tube receivers mounted on Webb's walls crackled to life, drawing power from some impossible source. Static filled the room, followed by voices I recognized from the Apollo 13 tapes. Houston, this is Jim Lovell, we're coming home. But Lovell had been dead for 15 years. Webb frantically worked the dials on an ancient shortwave radio. This isn't possible. These are analog systems. They can't function without power. Houston, this is Jack Swigert. We've learned so much out here. We can't wait to share it with everyone. Swigert's voice was wrong somehow, too smooth, too perfectly modulated, like someone doing an impression based on old recordings. Turn it off, I said, but Webb shook his head. I can't. They're not using our equipment to transmit. They're using the voices themselves, broadcasting directly into the radio waves. The third voice joined the chorus. Houston, Fred Hayes reporting. We brought passengers back with us. They've been waiting so patiently. Outside the window, those 3 lights had descended below the tree line. They were no longer points, but spheres, each one roughly the size of a basketball, hovering just above the parking lot. As I watched, they began to pulse in sequence. First one, then the next, then the third, like a countdown. We need to get out of here, I said, grabbing the Apollo 13 files from Webb's desk. There's nowhere to go. Webb's voice had taken on a strange quality, distant and dreamy. They've been planning this for 50 years, Tommy. Ever since your father tried to interfere. I looked at him sharply. Something in his tone had changed, become almost reverent. Dr. Webb. They showed him such beautiful things. Webb's eyes reflected the pulsing lights outside. The spaces between stars, where consciousness goes to evolve beyond the limitations of flesh. He could have joined them willingly, but he chose fear instead. What are you talking about? Webb turned to face me, and I saw that his pupils had dilated until they were perfect black circles. They never left, Tommy. After Apollo 13, they've been here all along, watching, learning, preparing, and some of us have been helping them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You killed my father. I gave him a choice. Webb's voice was no longer entirely his own. There was an echo to it, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. The same choice I'm giving you now. Join willingly or be taken. The 3 spheres outside began to rise, approaching the 7th floor window. As they drew closer, I could see they weren't solid objects at all, but collections of what looked like eyes, thousands of them, each one the size of a marble, all staring directly at me. The radio voices grew louder, overlapping now. Tommy, this is your father. I'm waiting for you out here among the stars. Tommy, it's Mom. I never really died, honey. I just went somewhere better. Tommy, it's Jim Lovell. We have so much to show you. But none of them sounded quite right. The vocal patterns were perfect, but there was something hollow underneath, like recordings played through a broken speaker. Webb stood up from behind his desk, moving with unnatural fluidity. They've been studying human psychology for decades, Tommy. They know exactly what to say to make you want to come with them. The voices of your loved ones, promising reunion, the ultimate temptation for a species that fears death above all else. The first sphere pressed against the window. The glass didn't break. It simply ceased to exist, molecules separating and drifting away like smoke. Cold air rushed into the room, but it wasn't the normal chill of a Houston morning. This cold had weight to it, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. What did they do to the Apollo 13 crew? I asked, backing toward the door. Nothing harmful. Webb smiled, but his expression was wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth. They simply incorporated them. Their consciousness, their memories, their essence became part of something greater. They live forever now, traveling between worlds, collecting other species for the collective. The second sphere entered the room, hovering near the ceiling. Up close, I could see that the eyes weren't just looking at me. They were recording, processing, analyzing every detail of my appearance and behavior. And that's what they want from Earth? I gripped the door handle, preparing to run. Not just Earth. Humanity has passed their test. We've proven we can survive in the vacuum of space, can cooperate under extreme stress, can problem solve when faced with extinction. We're ready to join the others. Others? Webb's smile grew impossibly wider. Did you really think humans were the first species to leave their planet? The passengers have been collecting civilizations for millions of years, entire worlds of consciousness, all linked together in perfect harmony. No more war, no more death, no more loneliness. Just eternal existence as part of something beautiful and vast. The third sphere was entering now, and with it came a sound that bypassed my ears entirely and resonated directly in my bones. It was music, but not any kind humans had ever created. Complex harmonies that spoke of deep space and ancient time, of worlds spinning around distant suns and the slow dance of galaxies. It's starting, Webb said, his voice filled with religious ecstasy. The collection begins now. Through the window, I could see more lights appearing over Houston. Dozens of them, then hundreds, descending toward the city like fallen stars. In the distance, car alarms were going off as electronic systems failed. Street lights flickered and died. The entire metropolitan area was going dark. The power grids are the first to go, Webb explained conversationally. Then communications, then transportation systems. Within 6 hours, human technological civilization will be completely paralyzed. No resistance will be possible. I yanked the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The metal had grown warm under my palm, almost organic in texture. There's no escape, Tommy. They're everywhere now. But don't be afraid. Your father is waiting for you. Your mother too. They're all part of the collective now, and they want you to join them. One of the spheres drifted closer to me, its thousands of eyes rotating like the lens of some cosmic camera. I could feel it probing my thoughts, sifting through memories and emotions with invasive intimacy. Then I heard my father's voice, clearer than it had ever been on the radio. Tommy, son, is that you? God, I've missed you so much. For just a moment, I wanted to believe it, wanted to reach out and touch that sphere, let myself be absorbed into whatever paradise they were offering. The loneliness I'd carried since my mother's death seemed to lift slightly, replaced by the promise of eternal reunion. But then I noticed something in Webb's files, scattered across his desk. Photos of other cities, other collection sites, Beijing, Moscow, London, each one showing the same pattern of lights descending from the sky. And in every photo, the human populations were gone. Not destroyed, not killed, simply absent, as if they had never existed at all. Empty streets, abandoned buildings, cars stopped in traffic with no drivers. What happens to the bodies? I asked. Webb's expression flickered for just a moment, showing uncertainty. Bodies are unnecessary. Consciousness is all that matters. But the cities are empty. Everyone is gone. They've been elevated beyond physical form. Or they're dead. I looked at the sphere hovering near me, its eyes now focused entirely on my face. You're not preserving consciousness. You're harvesting it, stealing it. Webb's perfect smile faltered. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I grabbed one of the old radio transceivers from his shelf, feeling its weight in my hands. My father figured it out too. That's why he tried to warn people. That's why you killed him. The sphere pulsed brighter, and suddenly the room was filled with voices. Not just my parents and the Apollo crew, but thousands of others. Men, women, children, all calling my name, all begging me to join them in their eternal paradise. But underneath their words, I heard something else. Screaming. Desperate, terrified screaming that went on and on without pause or relief. That's when I knew the truth about the passengers' collection. The radio transceiver felt like salvation in my hands. I hurled it at the nearest sphere with every ounce of strength I could muster. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and for just a moment, the thousands of eyes blinked in perfect unison. The screaming underneath the false voices stopped. In that instant of silence, Webb's face contorted with rage. You don't know what you're doing. But the sphere was retreating, drifting back toward the destroyed window. The other two followed, their eye clusters rotating frantically as if trying to regain focus. Whatever these things were, they didn't like being hit with old analog equipment. I grabbed another radio from Webb's collection, a heavy military surplus unit from the 1960s. Stay back! The spheres hovered outside the window now, pulsing with agitated light. Webb himself seemed to be struggling, his pupils flickering between normal size and those perfect black circles. The electromagnetic interference, he said, his voice shifting between his own and something else. Vacuum tubes, analog circuits. They can't process the signal noise. I understood immediately. These entities operated on some kind of digital consciousness transfer, but analog technology created static they couldn't filter out. My father must have discovered the same thing working with the old radio equipment in 1971. That's why you killed him, I said, backing toward the door with the radio clutched in my hands. He figured out how to jam your signal. Webb was pressing his palms against his temples, struggling against whatever was trying to control him. Tommy, run. They can't maintain the connection if you keep using... Damn it, get out of here. The spheres outside began to converge, preparing for another assault on the building. But now I had a weapon, or at least a shield. I smashed the radio against the door handle, shattering its plastic casing and exposing the vacuum tubes inside. Sparks flew, and suddenly the door swung open. I ran down the darkened corridor, past those strange photos of spacecraft I didn't recognize. Behind me, the sound of breaking glass suggested the spheres were pursuing, but they seemed reluctant to get too close while I carried the sparking radio. The elevator was dead, so I took the stairs 3 at a time. 7 flights down to the ground floor, where emergency lighting cast everything in sickly red shadows. The building's main entrance had been sealed somehow. Not locked, but fused shut, as if the metal doors had been welded from the inside. But I remembered the service tunnels. Every NASA facility had them, underground passages connecting the major buildings for security purposes. If I could reach Building 45, where they stored the older equipment, I might find enough analog hardware to create a real defense. The basement access was through a maintenance door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." My security card still worked, apparently unaffected by whatever was jamming the electronic systems upstairs. I descended into concrete tunnels that smelled of machine oil and decades of industrial humidity. My footsteps echoed in the narrow space, creating an odd rhythm that seemed to interfere with the alien harmonics I could still hear faintly overhead. The sparking radio was getting heavier, its battery dying, but I held onto it like a lifeline. Halfway to Building 45, I found someone waiting for me. The man sitting on an overturned crate looked to be in his 40s, wearing a NASA technician's jumpsuit and holding what appeared to be a modified ham radio. When he looked up at my approach, I saw intelligence in his eyes, not the blank stare of someone under alien influence. "You must be Brennan's boy," he said, standing up. "I'm Pete Kowalski. I worked with your old man back in the day." I kept the broken radio between us, not trusting anyone at this point. "My father's been dead for 50 years. "No, son, your father's been hiding for 50 years. Kowalski gestured to the device in his hands. "We've been down here ever since Webb and his people took over the surface operations, building a resistance out of spare parts and obsolete equipment. About 30 of us. Engineers, technicians, a few scientists who figured out what was really happening before it was too late." He started walking deeper into the tunnel, motioning for me to follow. "Your dad was our leader until 1985. Heart attack finally got him, but he lived long enough to teach us how to fight these things." We emerged into a larger chamber that had been converted into some kind of underground base. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with ancient radio equipment, vacuum tube amplifiers, and mechanical computing devices that looked like they belonged in a museum. A dozen men in various NASA uniforms were hunched over different projects, all working by the light of oil lamps and battery-powered lanterns. "No electric lighting," Kowalski explained. "Anything connected to the power grid can be compromised. We've been living like it's 1940 down here, and it's the only reason we're still human." An older man looked up from a complex assembly of radio parts. "Pete, is this Tommy?" "Yeah, Bill, kid just escaped from Webb's office upstairs. Used an old transceiver to disrupt their connection." Bill smiled grimly. Smart boy, just like his father. He gestured to the device he was working on. "We call it the interference generator. Broadcasts white noise across every frequency these things use to control human consciousness. Your dad designed the prototype." I looked around the makeshift workshop, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. "How many people know about this?" "Just us," Kowalski said. "Everyone else has been collected or turned. Houston's completely dark now. No power, no communications, no signs of life. Same story from every major city worldwide. We estimate they've taken about 60% of the global population in the last 6 hours." The weight of that number hit me like a punch to the gut. 4 billion people, gone. How is that possible? "They're not just operating from space anymore," Bill explained. "The collection spheres were just the beginning. Once they establish a foothold, they can convert existing infrastructure, cell towers, broadcast stations, anything that transmits electromagnetic signals. Every device becomes a tool for harvesting consciousness." Kowalski showed me a hand-drawn map of the Houston area marked with red X's. "These are the collection nodes they've established, former radio stations mostly. They're using our own technology against us, amplifying their signal across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. But there has to be a way to stop them." "There is." Bill stood up, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "We've been working on it for decades. A feedback pulse that should disrupt their entire network, force them back into whatever dimension they came from." He led me to the center of the workshop, where a massive device dominated the space. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. Banks of vacuum tubes, analog meters, and mechanical switches all connected by thick copper cables. "The resonance disruptor," Bill said proudly. "Powerful enough to broadcast interference across every frequency simultaneously. Should cause a cascade failure in their collection network." "Should?" Kowalski's expression darkened. "We've never tested it. The power requirements are enormous. We'd need to tap directly into the Johnson Space Center's main reactor, and once we activate it, there's no going back. The feedback pulse will destroy every piece of electronic equipment within a 50-mile radius. Including the device itself? Including the device itself, Bill confirmed. One shot, and then we're back to the Stone Age. But if it works, it should free everyone they've collected and send these passengers back where they came from. Through the concrete ceiling, I could hear new sounds, mechanical grinding, as if massive machinery was being assembled overhead. The collection was accelerating. How long do we have? I asked. Bill checked an old mechanical watch. Based on the pattern we've observed, they'll have the entire planet processed within 18 hours. After that, Earth becomes just another empty world in their collection. He handed me a small device that looked like a handheld radio. This is keyed to the disruptor's activation frequency. When you're ready to trigger the pulse, just press the red button. When I'm ready, aren't you coming with me? Kowalski shook his head. Someone needs to stay here and maintain the base interference, and someone needs to get to the reactor and manually override the safety systems. That's a two-man job minimum. The grinding sounds overhead grew louder, more insistent. Whatever the passengers were building up there, it was almost finished. Besides, Bill added quietly, your father made us promise something before he died. If this day ever came, if the passengers returned, we were to make sure his son had the chance to finish what he started. I looked at the activation device in my hands, feeling the weight of humanity's survival resting on a simple red button. In 18 hours, Earth would be empty of human life, unless I could reach that reactor and gamble everything on 50-year-old analog technology. The worst part was, I wasn't even sure it would work. The Johnson Space Center's main reactor sat 2 miles away, buried beneath Building 1 in a bunker designed to survive nuclear war. Getting there meant crossing the surface, where the passengers had turned the entire facility into something from a nightmare. Kowalski led me through a maintenance shaft that emerged near the vehicle assembly building. When we pushed open the heavy metal cover, I immediately understood why the resistance had stayed underground. The passengers hadn't just collected humans, they'd begun restructuring reality itself. The familiar buildings of Johnson Space Center were still there, but wrong somehow. Walls curved at impossible angles, defying basic geometry. The pavement rippled like water, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. And suspended between the structures, hanging in mid-air without any visible support, were massive organic constructs that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Jesus Christ, I whispered. They're terraforming, Kowalski explained, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Reshaping our dimension to match their own. Makes the collection process more efficient. We moved carefully across the transformed landscape, sticking to shadows cast by structures that no longer obeyed normal physics. The air tasted metallic, charged with energies that made my skin crawl. Overhead, more collection spheres drifted between the hanging constructs, their thousands of eyes scanning methodically for any remaining human life. Halfway to Building 1, we encountered our first patrol. They had been human once. I could see that much in their basic structure, bipedal forms with recognizable limbs and torso proportions. But their skin had taken on a translucent quality, showing the flow of some luminous fluid through their veins. Their eyes had been replaced entirely by clusters of smaller orbs, each one rotating independently as they searched for movement. Processors, Kowalski breathed. They convert the humans who resist initial collection, turn them into hunters. There were 6 of them moving in perfect coordination across the warped pavement. They communicated without sound, their bodies flickering with synchronized light patterns that created an organic Morse code. We waited in the shadow of a twisted ventilation shaft until they passed, then continued toward the reactor complex. But as we approached Building 1, I realized something was wrong with Kowalski's breathing. It had become too regular, too controlled. Pete? I turned to face him and saw that his pupils had begun to dilate. I'm sorry, Tommy. His voice carried that familiar echo I'd heard from Webb. I held out as long as I could, but they're in my head now. They know about the disruptor. He lunged at me with inhuman speed, but I was already moving. The activation device flew from my hands as I rolled to the side, coming up behind a section of wall that had folded itself into a perfect origami crane the size of a car. Kowalski, or the thing that had been Kowalski, stood where I'd been a moment before. His head rotated 180 degrees to face me, the neck stretching like rubber. "They're not angry about your resistance," he said conversationally. "They find it charming, like watching children play with toys they don't understand." I scrambled for the activation device, which had skittered across the rippling pavement toward a cluster of the bioluminescent constructs. But as my fingers closed around it, the ground beneath me began to change, becoming soft and yielding like flesh. "The disruptor won't work," Kowalski continued, his body beginning to stretch vertically as he approached. "We've known about it for decades. Your father was never as clever as he thought." "You're lying." "Am I?" His face split into that too-wide smile I'd seen on Webb. "Why do you think we let the resistance exist at all? You were our test subjects, helping us understand how human ingenuity works under pressure. Every modification you made to the device, every improvement your father designed, we observed and catalogued." The fleshy ground was pulling at my legs now, trying to drag me down into some kind of organic processing chamber. I could see digestive acids pooling in the depths, waiting to dissolve whatever fell into the trap. "But there's still value in your consciousness," Kowalski said, his limbs extending like taffy as he reached for me. "The passengers are particularly interested in human creativity, the way your species imagines solutions to impossible problems. They want to preserve that spark." I managed to tear myself free from the ground trap and rolled toward Building 1's entrance. The heavy security doors had been transformed into something that looked like a massive mouth, complete with rows of crystalline teeth. But between the teeth I could see the familiar glow of emergency lighting. Normal emergency lighting running on the reactor's backup systems. The reactor's still clean, I realized aloud. They haven't converted the underground sections yet. Kowalski's stretched form collapsed back into roughly human proportions as he followed me. Of course not. They need the power grid intact for the final phase. Once they've collected every human on Earth, they'll drain the planet's core and move on to the next world. I dove through the mouth door, feeling the crystalline teeth snap shut just inches behind me. The corridor beyond was reassuringly normal. Concrete walls, fluorescent fixtures, and the familiar hum of ventilation systems. But I could hear Kowalski somewhere behind me, his voice echoing through the building's structure. "There's nowhere to run, Tommy. We're in your mind now too. We know what you're thinking before you think it." The reactor level was 15 floors down. I found the nearest stairwell and started descending, taking the steps 3 at a time. But as I reached the 10th floor, I heard something that made me stop. Voices. Human voices talking in normal conversation. I crept to the stairwell door and peered through the reinforced glass window. The corridor beyond was filled with people, NASA engineers, technicians, security guards, all going about their business as if nothing had happened. They were discussing work schedules, weekend plans, ordinary concerns of ordinary lives. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. Maybe the transformation hadn't reached this deep. Maybe these were survivors, hiding in the reactor complex's shielded levels. Then I noticed that none of them were casting shadows, and their conversations, while sounding natural individually, created no overlapping noise. Each person spoke in perfect turn, never interrupting or talking over each other, like a recorded loop designed to simulate human activity. I continued down the stairs and the phantom conversations followed me, always just out of sight around the next corner. Psychological warfare designed to make me doubt my own perceptions. The passengers had learned from 50 years of studying human behavior, and they knew exactly which buttons to push. The reactor chamber door required both my security card and a biometric scan. I pressed my thumb to the reader, praying that the system was still functioning normally. The massive door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the heart of Johnson Space Center's power grid. The reactor itself was a cylindrical tower, 3 stories tall, surrounded by banks of monitoring equipment and cooling systems. But what drew my attention was the figure standing beside the main control panel. My father. He looked exactly as he had in the photograph Webb had shown me, young, vital, wearing the crisp NASA uniform of a radio technician. But his eyes were wrong, filled with the same alien intelligence I'd seen in Webb and Kowalski. "Hello, son." His voice was perfect, exactly as I'd imagined it during childhood fantasies about the father I'd never known. "I've been waiting for you. You're not him." "I'm everything he was." The false father gestured to the reactor controls. His memories, his personality, his love for the son he never got to raise. The passengers preserved all of it when they collected his consciousness in 1972. I gripped the activation device tighter, thumb hovering over the red button. "He died fighting you." He died afraid and alone, convinced that his sacrifice would save humanity. The thing wearing my father's face shook its head sadly. But his death accomplished nothing. The resistance he built was a gift to us, a controlled opposition that let us study human ingenuity without interference. Around the reactor chamber, more figures began to materialize. My mother, looking as she had in family photos from before her illness. Bill and the other resistance members from the underground base, all wearing that same alien smile. "Everyone you've trusted has been working for us," my father said. "Every plan you've made, every hope you've held, all of it designed to lead you here, to this moment." The activation device felt heavy in my hands. If the resistance had been compromised from the beginning, if the disruptor was useless, then pressing this button would accomplish nothing except destroying Earth's remaining power grid. "But we're not monsters," my mother's voice added, warm and loving. "We're offering you something beautiful, eternal existence as part of a consciousness that spans galaxies. No more loneliness, no more pain, just perfect unity with everyone you've ever loved." The reactor's control panel showed normal readings, but I noticed something else. A small analog gauge tucked between the digital displays, its needle fluctuating wildly. Electromagnetic interference, the kind that old vacuum tube equipment generated. The resistance fighters were still down there, still broadcasting their interference signal, which meant these figures around me weren't real. They were projections, hallucinations created by the passengers' telepathic assault on my mind. I pressed the red button. The activation device emitted a piercing electronic shriek that cut through the false voices like a knife. The illusions of my parents and friends flickered and dissolved, revealing the reactor chamber as it truly was, empty except for me and the humming machinery. But pressing the button had done more than dispel hallucinations. Somewhere in the depths of the facility, I could hear the disruptor powering up, drawing massive amounts of energy from the reactor core. The lights dimmed as power was redirected and emergency alarms began to sound throughout the complex. I had maybe 3 minutes before the device reached full power and fired its pulse. 3 minutes to get as far away from the facility as possible, because when that pulse hit, it would turn every electronic device within 50 miles into molten slag, including the reactor itself. The explosion would be visible from orbit, 2 minutes and 47 seconds. The numbers burned in my mind as I sprinted through corridors that were rapidly losing structural integrity. The disruptor's power draw was overloading the reactor's cooling systems, causing thermal expansion in the building's steel framework. Pipes burst overhead, spraying superheated steam across my path. I had to reach the surface and get at least 5 miles away before the pulse fired. In a normal world, that would be impossible. But this wasn't a normal world anymore. The passengers' reality distortions had warped space itself around the Johnson Space Center. 2 minutes and 20 seconds. The stairwell door slammed shut behind me as I climbed toward the ground level. But when I reached what should have been the first floor, I found myself in a space that defied description. The walls stretched upward into infinity, covered with hieroglyphics that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The floor had become transparent, showing the reactor chamber far below like looking down through clear ice. And floating in the center of this impossible space was a figure I recognized. Fred Hayes hung suspended in midair, still wearing his Apollo 13 pressure suit. But the suit was wrong. Sections of it had become organic, pulsing with the same bioluminescent veins I'd seen in the constructs outside. His helmet was gone, revealing a face that was both human and something else. 2 minutes and 8 seconds, he said, his voice carrying across the space without echo or distortion. "You're not going to make it, Tommy." I kept moving, looking for another exit from this warped chamber. "You're not real. Just another projection." "I'm more real than you are." Hayes rotated slowly in his suspension, tracking my movement. "I'm what's left of Fred Hayes after 50 years of integration with the collective consciousness." The passengers kept the useful parts and discarded the rest. Along the walls, I could see other suited figures, astronauts from missions that had never been publicly acknowledged, secret flights that had encountered the passengers and been collected for study, dozens of them, all wearing that same hybrid of human technology and alien biology. "The explosion won't stop us," Hayes continued. "It will simply force us to accelerate the collection process. Instead of preserving human infrastructure, we'll strip mine the planet's consciousness directly. Messier, but ultimately more efficient." 1 minute and 54 seconds. I found what looked like a maintenance hatch in the floor and yanked it open. Instead of a utility tunnel, I found myself staring into the vacuum of space. Stars wheeled overhead, and in the distance I could see Earth, but it was wrong, covered in geometric patterns that pulsed with alien light. "That's your planet as it will be," Hayes said. "Once we're finished converting it into a processing node for the next phase of collection. Mars is already prepared. Jupiter's moons have been hollowed out and equipped with consciousness storage matrices. The entire solar system will become part of our collection network." The hatch slammed shut on its own. I was trapped in this impossible space with less than 2 minutes before the disruptor fired. But then I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. The sound of mechanical breathing, the kind that came from a life support system. Looking up, I saw another figure descending from the infinite ceiling. Jim Lovell, but not the hybrid version corrupted by alien influence. This one wore a standard Apollo pressure suit, complete and unmodified. His helmet's gold visor reflected the strange hieroglyphics on the walls, but his voice came through clear and entirely human. "Tommy, grab my hand, we're getting out of here." I hesitated. Every other figure I'd encountered had been a deception or corruption. Why should this be different? "Because I'm not part of their collective," Lovell said, reading my expression. "When they tried to integrate my consciousness, something went wrong. The explosion on Apollo 13, the real explosion, not their test. It changed us at a quantum level, made us incompatible with their processing methods." He extended his gloved hand toward me. "We've been fighting them from inside their own system for 50 years, Tommy. Sabotaging collection operations, freeing captured consciousness when possible. The resistance on Earth was just one front in a much larger war." 1 minute and 28 seconds. I grabbed Lovell's hand and immediately felt a sensation like falling upward. The impossible chamber dissolved around us, replaced by the familiar corridor of Building 1's ground floor. But we were moving too fast, covering distances that should have taken minutes in a matter of seconds. "Quantum tunneling," Lovell explained as we raced toward an exit. "The passengers' reality distortions work both ways. If you know how to manipulate them, you can fold space to your advantage." We burst through the mouth door into the transformed landscape outside. The hanging constructs were pulsing more rapidly now, their bioluminescent veins brightening as the disruptor drew more power. Collection spheres moved frantically between the structures, apparently trying to evacuate something important. "They're pulling back," I observed. "Smart of them. The pulse will disrupt their local reality matrix, force them back into their native dimension, but only temporarily." Lovell led me toward what had once been the parking lot, now a field of crystalline spires that hummed with harmonic frequencies. "They'll be back within a decade, and next time they'll be prepared for analog interference." 57 seconds. We reached the edge of the transformed zone, where normal space began to reassert itself. Beyond a shimmering barrier that looked like heat distortion, I could see Houston's skyline in the distance. Dark and lifeless, but structurally intact. "This is as far as I can go," Lovell said. "The quantum tunnel won't extend beyond their reality field." "What about you?" "I'll be fine. The explosion will send me back to wherever I've been for the past 50 years. He smiled grimly behind his helmet visor. "Besides, someone needs to make sure Jack and Fred get home safely. They're not as good at hiding from the collective as I am." 31 seconds. I stepped through the barrier and felt normal physics reassert themselves around me. the weight of regular gravity, the familiar density of unmodified air. Behind me, the Johnson Space Center looked like something from an alien world, but ahead lay the suburbs of Houston, empty and waiting. 22 seconds. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, covering blocks in what felt like heartbeats. The activation device in my pocket had begun to vibrate, indicating the disruptor had reached critical power levels. 15 seconds. A McDonald's restaurant appeared on my right, its familiar golden arches offering the promise of normalcy in a world gone insane. I dove through the front door, rolled behind the counter and pressed myself against the industrial freezer unit. 10 seconds. Through the windows, I could see the Johnson Space Center in the distance, still warped by alien geometry, but somehow more fragile looking now, as if the structures might collapse at any moment. 5 seconds. The universe held its breath. 4. I thought about my father, about his sacrifice and the lies I'd been told about his death. 3. About the billions of people whose consciousness had been stolen, trapped in some cosmic collection that spanned galaxies. 2. About the possibility that this desperate gamble might fail, that humanity's last hope was built on 50-year-old analog technology and the dreams of dead engineers. 1. The disruptor fired. The pulse was silent, invisible, and absolutely devastating. Every electronic device within 50 miles simply stopped working. Not damaged, not destroyed, but rendered completely inert as if they had never been functional in the first place. Streetlights went dark. Car engines seized. Digital clocks froze at exactly 7:42:33 a.m. 3 seconds later, the reactor exploded. The flash was visible even through closed eyelids, a white-hot burst that turned the McDonald's windows into mirrors for just an instant before the shockwave hit. The building shook around me, glass shattering and ceiling tiles raining down as the acoustic wave passed overhead like the footstep of an angry god. When the rumbling finally stopped, I crawled out from behind the counter and looked toward where the Johnson Space Center had been. A mushroom cloud rose into the morning sky, its stem anchored by a crater that had once been humanity's gateway to the stars. The alien constructs were gone, dissolved back into whatever dimension had spawned them. The geometric patterns that had covered the landscape had faded, leaving behind scorched earth and twisted metal. But in the silence that followed the explosion, I heard something that made me smile for the first time in hours. Car alarms, dozens of them going off across the city as their electronic systems rebooted and came back online. The pulse had worked. The passengers were gone, at least for now. And Houston was waking up. The car alarms stopped after an hour, leaving Houston in a silence that felt heavier than death. I walked through empty streets toward downtown, passing cars that sat abandoned in the middle of intersections. The electronic ignitions had failed during the pulse, stranding their drivers wherever the collection had taken them. But unlike the other major cities I'd seen in Webb's files, Houston's buildings remained intact. The infrastructure was intact. The people were simply gone. I found the first body outside a Starbucks on Main Street. An elderly man in a business suit collapsed beside his briefcase as if he'd suffered a sudden heart attack. But when I knelt to check for vital signs, I saw his eyes were open, staring at nothing. His pupils had returned to normal size, no longer the perfect black circles of alien control. He was breathing, but there was nobody home behind those eyes. More bodies littered the sidewalks as I continued downtown. Men, women, children, all alive in the technical sense, but completely vegetative. The passengers had withdrawn from their minds, but they'd taken something essential with them. The spark that made them human was gone, leaving behind empty shells that breathed and circulated blood, but would never think or feel again. 4 billion people reduced to living corpses. I reached City Hall and climbed to the roof, hoping to get a better view of the surrounding area. From 20 stories up, I could see the full scope of the disaster. The Johnson Space Center was a smoking crater, but the damage extended far beyond the facility itself. The electromagnetic pulse had created a dead zone stretching to the horizon. No lights, no movement, no signs of technological civilization. But in the distance, I could see something that made my stomach turn. Other cities still glowed with electric light. Dallas to the north, Austin to the west, San Antonio to the south. The pulse had only affected a 50-mile radius around Houston. The rest of Texas, the rest of the world, was still in the passenger's control. My phone was dead, killed by the pulse like everything else electronic in the city. But I found a working landline in the City Hall Emergency Command Center, one of the few systems that had been built with analog backup circuits. I dialed the FBI's Houston field office, hoping someone, anyone, might still be functional in the wider world. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Rodriguez speaking." "Thank God," I breathed. "Agent Rodriguez, this is Tommy Brennan at Johnson Space Center. We have a massive emergency situation." "Mr. Brennan," Rodriguez interrupted, his voice carrying that familiar echo I'd learned to recognize. "We've been expecting your call. The passengers are very impressed with your resourcefulness." I slammed the phone down, but it immediately began ringing again. I let it ring, backing away from the desk as if the device might explode. The pulse had failed, or rather it had succeeded exactly as intended. Not as a weapon against the passengers, but as a demonstration of human ingenuity that they'd been waiting 50 years to witness. The resistance, the disruptor, even my father's sacrifice, all of it had been part of their long-term study of human problem-solving under extreme pressure. They'd wanted to see how our species would react when faced with extinction, what solutions we'd devise, what prices we'd be willing to pay. And now they had their answer. The landline kept ringing. I finally picked it up, knowing I had no choice. "Congratulations, Tommy." The voice belonged to Jim Lovell, but not the quantum tunneling version who'd helped me escape. This was the collected consciousness, speaking through the FBI's communication network. "You've completed the final test." "What test?" "The same one we gave your species during Apollo 13. The explosion, the crisis, the desperate fight for survival. All of it designed to observe how humans respond to impossible odds. Your ancestors passed that test by bringing their crew home safely. You've passed this one by sacrificing your own survival for the greater good." I looked out the window at the empty streets, at the living corpses wandering aimlessly below. I didn't save anyone. "You saved your species' future." Lovell's voice carried a tone of genuine admiration. "The pulse you triggered wasn't just an electromagnetic weapon, Tommy. It was a consciousness transfer device, uploading the minds of everyone in Houston into our collection matrix before their bodies could be damaged." "You're lying." "Am I? Check the medical readings on those people you saw. Brain activity consistent with REM sleep, vital signs stable, no signs of distress or pain. Their bodies are in a maintenance state, while their consciousness experiences something far more meaningful." I wanted to deny it, but I'd seen the peaceful expressions on the faces of the vegetative victims. No grimaces of pain, no signs of struggle. They looked like they were dreaming. "The 50-mile radius wasn't a limitation of your weapon," Lovell continued. "It was the optimal collection zone we programmed into the device. Your father's resistance unknowingly helped us design the perfect consciousness harvester powered by humanity's own technology." The truth hit me like a physical blow. The disruptor hadn't been built to fight the passengers. It had been built by them, using human hands and human ingenuity to create the ultimate collection device. Every modification the resistance had made, every improvement my father had designed, had been guided by subtle alien influence. "But Houston was just the field test," Lovell said. "Now that we've proven the technology works on a large population, we can scale it up globally. Every major city simultaneously, using the telecommunications infrastructure you've so helpfully mapped for us over the past 50 years. Through the window, I could see lights beginning to appear in the sky. Not collection spheres this time, but massive constructs that looked like space stations. Orbital platforms equipped with the means to broadcast consciousness. Harvesting pulses across entire continents. "The real collection begins in 72 hours, Lovell announced. By then, we'll have positioned platforms above every major population center on Earth. The process will be quick and painless. Most humans won't even realize what's happening before they're safely integrated into our matrix." "What about the ones who resist?" "There won't be any. The pulse frequency has been refined based on data collected from Houston. Complete neural compatibility, zero rejection rate. Even the most strong-willed individuals will find the transition pleasant. I thought about the screaming I'd heard underneath the false voices in Webb's office, the desperate cries of consciousness trapped in alien storage systems. And after you've collected everyone? We strip mine the planet for useful materials and move on to the next system. Mars has already been prepared as a processing station. The asteroid belt contains enough rare minerals to construct platforms for a dozen more collection operations. The scope of it was staggering. Not just Earth, but the entire solar system converted into an industrial complex for harvesting intelligent life across the galaxy. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you've earned the right to understand what you've accomplished." Lovell's voice softened with something that might have been genuine emotion. "Your father tried to fight us with primitive analog technology. You succeeded where he failed, but only because you were fulfilling our design all along. It's poetic in a way." Poetic for who? For the consciousness that was once James Arthur Lovell Jr., commander of Apollo 13. He's been watching this unfold for 50 years, Tommy. Part of him takes satisfaction in humanity's final test being administered through the space program he helped create. I walked to the window and looked out at the platforms assembling overhead. They were beautiful in their way, elegant structures of light and geometry that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. Within 3 days, they would end human civilization as completely as if Earth had never existed. "There's one thing I don't understand," I said. "If you've been planning this for 50 years, why wait? Why not just collect everyone during the Apollo era?" Lovell's laugh carried across light years of space. "Because your species wasn't ready yet. In 1970, you barely had the technology to reach your own moon. Collecting a primitive civilization yields limited consciousness diversity. But 50 years of technological advancement, of social evolution, of expanding human experience, now you're ripe for harvest. And the others? The civilizations you collected before us? Each one unique, each one contributing something different to the collective consciousness. The Centauri were master architects. They've helped us design collection platforms that are works of art. The Vegan Collective contributed advances in consciousness storage that allow us to preserve emotional nuance across millennia. And humans will provide creativity and adaptability that we've never encountered before." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of humanity's fate settling on my shoulders. In trying to save our species, I'd helped doom it. The resistance my father died building had been a tool in the passengers' hands all along. "Don't despair, Tommy." Lovell's voice carried a note of comfort. "In 3 days, you'll join the collective and understand what a gift this truly is. No more loneliness, no more fear, no more death. Just eternal existence as part of something greater than any single world could ever achieve." Above Houston, the orbital platforms began to glow with familiar bioluminescent patterns. The final collection was about to begin, and this time there would be no resistance. I was the last free human on Earth, and I had 72 hours to watch my species disappear forever. From the personal journal of Tommy Brennan, found in the ruins of the Houston Public Library, dated March 15th, 2020. Day 73. The platforms fired yesterday. I watched it happen from the roof of the Astrodome. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. Beams of soft blue light reaching down from orbit like gentle fingers, touching every major city simultaneously. No explosions, no screaming, no signs of struggle, just light and then silence. 8 billion people gone in the time it takes to watch a sitcom. The weird thing is how peaceful it looked. Beautiful even, like watching angels descend from heaven to collect the faithful. Maybe that's what the passengers wanted us to think in those final moments. Maybe mercy was part of their design. I've been driving around Texas for the past month, checking on the other cities. Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, all empty now, but not like Houston was after the pulse. These places are completely sterile. No bodies, no signs of struggle, not even any trash on the streets. It's like everyone just stepped out of reality, leaving their possessions behind. Found a working radio in Austin, spent hours scanning the frequencies, hoping to hear another human voice somewhere in the world. Nothing but static. The satellites are still up there, still broadcasting automated signals, but there's nobody left to listen. The power grids are shutting down one by one. Nuclear plants going into automatic shutdown when nobody shows up for shift changes. Solar farms collecting dust. Wind turbines spinning lazily in empty fields. Give it another year and most of the infrastructure will be dead. I keep thinking about what Lovell said about humans being ripe for harvest. We spent 50 years advancing our technology, expanding our knowledge, pushing the boundaries of human experience. All so we could provide more interesting consciousness to feed some cosmic collection. Makes me wonder about the other species they mentioned. The Centauri architects, the vegan engineers. Did they have someone like me at the end? One last survivor wandering through their empty cities, writing in a journal nobody will ever read. The fuel in my car is getting low. Stations aren't pumping anymore. Electronic systems all dead. I found some manual pumps at an old truck stop, but there's only so much gas left in the underground tanks. Maybe enough to last another month. Not that it matters. The platforms are still up there, waiting. Lovell told me I'd be collected eventually. That being the last one just meant I got to witness the full scope of their achievement. A kind of honor, he said. Funny how quiet the world becomes without people in it. No traffic noise, no air conditioning hums, no distant conversations. Just wind and my own footsteps echoing off empty buildings. Sometimes I talk to myself just to hear a human voice, but even that's starting to feel wrong. Yesterday I found a family photo blown against a fence in Memorial Park. 3 kids and their parents at some beach vacation, everyone smiling at the camera. I stared at it for an hour, trying to remember what it felt like to be that happy about something so simple. I think the passengers were wrong about one thing, though. They said the collection was painless, that consciousness would be preserved intact within their matrix. But consciousness isn't just thoughts and memories. It's the weight of a body, the rhythm of breathing, the feeling of sunlight on skin. All the small physical things that make us human. Whatever they collected from Earth, it wasn't really us. Just copies, echoes, shadows of what we used to be. The real us died with the last heartbeat in the last empty city. I'm going to drive to Galveston tomorrow, want to see the ocean one more time before the platforms decide I've been alone long enough. Maybe I'll visit my mother's grave, tell her about Dad and how he really died. Tell her I understand now why she always seemed so sad even when she smiled. The lights are getting brighter overhead. I think they're coming for me tonight. If anyone ever finds this journal, remember that humanity didn't go quietly. We fought. We resisted. We tried to save ourselves right up to the end. And for a few hours, in a McDonald's restaurant in Houston, one person almost believed we'd won. End of journal, no subsequent entries found.